We have State Representative Vern Swanson and State Senator Tom Hawk. And it's a very interesting morning because both of them appear to have injuries. And I just want you to know I did not hit them. When they come on the air, I will we'll let them explain what's going on. But they apparently both have injuries on their arms, so that's an interesting observation. They might just be looking for some sympathy. I'm not quite sure. Now we do have a Facebook page. If somebody could tell me what the Facebook page is.
Play Center Area Chamber of Commerce.
Play Center Area Chamber of Commerce is the Facebook page if you would like to get on Facebook and pose questions to our legislators. And we also have a cell phone, and that is my own personal cell phone. Feel free to text your questions. We prefer that you text them, but if you do not text, feel free to call. Rebecca Fearking is here standing by to take the texts or the phone calls, and she will write down your question. Keep your question short and simple. And we also have Gina Fancella helping out, and Jay Langvart helping out this morning as well. They're all my tech crew here, so to speak. Our broadcast, once again, being brought to you by AT&T. Let's start, gentlemen, if you don't mind. Which one of you would like to go first? Should we toss a quarter, kind of like in football? Or, Let's go ahead and start with Vern. This is State Representative Vern Swanson. Good morning, Vern. What committees are you on this year?
Well, that was part of what I was going to talk about, Michelle. You're just heading right into it, aren't you?
Well, it's kind of the format. So.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the sponsors, and I think that's KCOY, AT&T, BPW, and the Clay Center Chamber, and I hope I haven't forgotten someone. Those are the ones that I understood were sponsoring or mainly sponsor this. In reference to Michelle's both of us being in slings. I'm not in a sling, but certainly Tom's is much more long-standing than mine. I had a fight with the snowdrift, and the snowdrift won. So the people in Sochi don't have to worry about me. I'm not going to be over there competing. So I'm on. I have 3 different committees that I'm on. I've been on transportation for all the time I've been in the legislature, which this is my 8th year, and that's the committee that deals with highways and bridges and T-works and all the things that go on with not just roads and highways, it's airports, bike paths, believe it or not. There's a lot of things that are involved in the T-works program these 10 years. I'm on Vision 2020. I'm vice chair of that committee, and Vision 2020 is a committee that was established, I'm going to say 6 years ago, with the purpose of looking to the year 2020. And you know, that's creeping up on us a lot quicker than we think. Not much comes out of Vision other than we hear a lot of people telling us about the kinds of things that are coming in the future. For instance, we've had an informational hearing on the 100 gigabyte, which I'm not sure I understand, but those who are techies in the room probably know that. 100 gigabyte fiber cable being laid in many of our cities. I thought it was interesting that it was the universities that are promoting this, and obviously they want to do it for research, and they want to combine Wichita State, KU, and KSU, those 3 universities in particular, and because they are considered research institutions, but they also want to make the other Regents institutions, as well as our community colleges, a part of the network. Well, I found it real interesting that I asked the question about those small telecom companies in our communities, such as Twin Valley. I said, so how can those small companies help this situation? Well, they weren't quite sure. So Ben Foster, president of Twin Valley, is coming next Wednesday, and he's going to tell them how they might use the fiber optic that's been laid by many of our small telecom companies throughout Kansas, because they would like to expand this into western Kansas, where it appears there's not much internet access. So we're hoping that maybe we can get some more information about things that are being done in our state. Then I'm on financial institutions. That's a brand new committee for me as of last year. I think I jokingly said that I learned last year about demand deposits, and because I had no clue. What is a demand deposit? We have certificates of deposit, we have savings deposits. well, it's a checking account. Why not just call it a checking account? You know, it's that simple. But they have to be, I guess, when you say demand deposit, everybody in the banking industry knows what it is. Well, I'm learning. And we've had just some hearings on consumer ed and on some of the consumer loans at companies that are throughout our state, like payday loans, that kind of thing. And, you know, what I've learned a lot about payday loans, that industry. I don't want to pick on particular companies, but payday loan, you know, it's anywhere from 7 to 30 days, and the interest rate is unbelievable with those kinds of loan, but they're necessary because people tend to use those in short-term emergencies. So it's one of those things of we use what we have to get by today, and we'll worry about tomorrow. Those are my committees, Michelle. Do you want, I guess, the senator's turn, and I'll have Senator Hawk go forward from here.
Thank you. You're ready for me, Michelle. Okay. Yes, I felt so bad when I was having lunch with Vern this week, and I looked over at his arm, and there was this huge bump on it. I said, "Oh my gosh, what did you do?" And he shared the snow pile story, and I thought, well, there must be something about representing Clay Center that makes it an orthopedic heaven for us to be here, because I had rotator cuff surgery before the session, and it's doing better the last week. I just got out of the recliner 2 days ago, and really, I think I'm going to do one of those sheep commercial bed things, because that tune is running through my mind thinking, oh my gosh, I can be in the bed again. So,
Yes.
but I am in sympathy with Vern, and I feel better when I have my sling more protected. So I'm braver than he is, and I was going to tell you that I actually almost got that gold medal in snowboarding last night, but I had to settle for whatever's after the bronze. I am on several committees. I'm the ranking minority member on the financial institutions and insurance, and I've learned a lot on that committee. Still have a lot more to learn. I'll share some of that. I'm on utilities committee, and we've had some interesting issues that I think could directly impact Clay Center there. I'm also on an agriculture committee and natural resources, and I also serve on a joint committee when we're generally out of session on joint rules and regulations, and then I was on the special committee on telecommunications that met in the off session too, trying to look at mainly the KUSF. It's a little tax that we get on our bills. We have both a federal and a state tax that helps support rural communities, and it was originally designed to make sure that those who live in rural communities actually have access to plain old telephone service. Well, POTS, as they call that, is certainly the minimum, and that has really changed. And I think if we're going to compete economically in rural communities, we need to have good broadband. And so I'm sort of intrigued by a lot of the stuff that goes on in the legislature. I think Will Rogers once said we don't have to worry about having comedy as long as Congress is in session. There's always something to laugh about. And I thought the last couple years were about as strange as it could get with the income tax and budget decisions. We have a whole host of bills that sort of run against my rural upbringing in Colby about the kinds of things we do to support rural Kansas and the things we do to support individuals and give people a fair playing field. And of course, one of those that was just introduced, I think it might have been in the House or my Senate committee, was by the cable company. And it's a very protectionistic bill for the existing providers that I call it the anti-Google bill, that 100 megabits that people are less concerned, I think, about universities that might have that. But they don't like that Google came into Kansas City and offered that ultra high speed, even though our competition internationally, my son just moved from Amsterdam to Hong Kong, and so a lot of those, quote, third world countries that we think that we're superior to have much faster and higher capacity broadband. So if we're going to even keep what was now basic farming practices, it has to rely on GPS and the fertilizer things and the kinds of things you need to do. I take my hat off to Twin Valley and the fact that when the big companies wouldn't come into rural places like my hometown of Colby or Clay Center and provide the kind of broadband that people knew we needed to have before most of us even knew what broadband meant. They did that. So my view is the legislature is there not only to support the lobbyists that come in and tell us what they need for usually their big businesses that can afford to hire them, but we're also there to represent the little guy and make sure the little guy has a chance. So I have a whole host of things I'd like to share that we may not have time for.
Well,
but
that's okay.
I'm very pleased to represent my area, and I had Geary County Chamber meeting last week, and we talked about interesting things, got into the gun bills and casinos, so we're getting into some of those marginal social type issues, but I think there are a whole lot of big things that actually impact all of us regardless of our political or religious persuasion, and hope we have a chance to visit about some of those this morning.
Okay. What I might do is have each of you bring the microphone as much as you can toward your face a little bit more. Just point it, yeah. You don't need to be directly on top of it, but just a little bit closer. Thank you. And I need to remind our listeners of my phone number. I was telling everybody they can text or call, but I didn't give the number. 785-630-0750. 785-630-0750. You can text or call, and we also have a Facebook page, Play Center Area Chamber Facebook page. Did I say that correctly, Jay? Okay. All right. We do already have a question, one that was actually handed to me yesterday, if you don't mind. And I know it's somewhat early, but if you can address this. Vern kept reminding me how early in the session it is. It is. We are very early in the session. But it is just a 12-week session, and this is the day we're going to do it. So you guys have to punt if necessary. You look like you might be able to handle that since your arms are the ones that are suffering.
I can place kick better than
you can toss at this point, yes. The question is about the lesser prairie chicken. Maybe more directly is about EPA and states' rights. The question is, are you able to stop the EPA from infringing on private property rights?
I would answer that very shortly by saying we haven't been able to yet.
Yeah. Tom, any comment?
Well, I have several thoughts about, and actually we've been working to this bill along with the red-bellied snake in Overland Park. That is not quite on that protected but slightly endangered species. I sort of turned to one of my colleagues, well, Elaine Bowers. We had about a 90-minute presentation from Parks and Wildlife on what they wanted to do as a state to mitigate the lesser prairie chicken. And I snidely said to her, being mostly a city boy, couldn't we actually use free enterprise to solve this problem? Subcontract it out to Kentucky Fried Chicken or Popeyes and let them go ahead and make some money off the lesser prairie chicken, and at the same time they'd want to protect it so they had a food source. Anyway.
You're going to get some emails now.
I didn't sign up for this job in perpetuity. Occasionally you have to say silly things so that people will wonder when election time comes around if they made the right choice. But what I'm concerned about, while we have to worry about the EPA, I think we have some things going on in the legislature that do concern me that could actually cost us a lot of money in litigation. And we had a bill that there are only a couple of us on my committee voted against, which sort of opts us out and says that the federal agents can't come across the Kansas boundaries and enforce federal laws. We had it, if you recall, last year on whether we're building bazookas and other large firearms in the state of Kansas that might be illegal federally, but if they're just kept in Kansas, we're going to stop the feds and throw them in jail. And somehow I have a feeling after the Civil War we might not win that one in terms of litigation, regardless of whether you think it's right or wrong. I think the lesser prairie chicken, I think that our staff at Parks and Wildlife are trying to do the right thing, and that's working with a 5-state area to come up with our own conservation plans. They had some of the oil companies and the wind companies lined up to provide the funding to do the mitigation. And basically, it's trying to make sure there's enough grassland so that the lesser prairie chicken doesn't go extinct. And most of us probably think, well, big deal. I don't think I've ever seen a lesser or a bigger or a medium prairie chicken. But I think if we look at how important it is to have diversity in our state and protect that, we sort of have to balance that out with what is common sense. I think we all agree maybe the EPA doesn't get on the common sense side, but I also think we have to agree if we just let people out of their own short-term economic interest decide whether or not they might plow everything up, we'd never have a Flint Hills, we'd never have some of the beautiful things that make Kansas a great place to live. So where do we balance that? I don't agree that my committee, we'll see what happens on the Senate floor, should take that kind of action. Even Robin Jennison, who's head of Parks and Wildlife, talked about the process they use, and again, the red belly snake is one of those that I didn't even know there was such a thing. But in Overland Park, they want to lay a water one pipe, and the red belly snake is protected, and they have to provide additional grasslands or mitigation or parks in order to lay their land. And of course, they think it's going to cost them $170,000. Parks and Wildlife said no, the number is $63,000. They don't want to spend anything. And probably if we let it go through the process, we're going to take the red-bellied snake off. Nobody has ever seen a sighting of the red-bellied snake at Overland Park. So that's sort of the ridiculous side of this. I think the lesser prairie chicken is kind of in the middle about, we don't want it to become an endangered species and have the feds come in and demand mitigation, because that may be more costly and problematic for landowners. But I think if we let our Parks and Wildlife people do their job, we ought to sit back and do that, and not try and make headlines and increase our legal costs by thumbing our nose and poking our fingers in the Fed's eyes on this issue.
Do you see it as a much broader issue of states' rights to some degree?
Well, I don't think I personally do.
Okay.
But I think a lot of people do, and it is an election year, and I think people are looking for those things that they can sort of twist that would make us look tough to the feds, and I tend to be more practical. I'd rather deal with the big issues like how are we going to fund education and make sure the Clay Center Tigers get supported, and how are we going to make sure that we don't overdo property taxes, which I think is our #1 problem now. So when we start dealing with these issues, I think we're avoiding the real issues that we ought to be dealing with.
Again, our number, 785-630-0750. You do not have to go on the air, but you can certainly call in a question. We have somebody here that can write your question down. You can also text to that number, 630-0750, and a Facebook page where you can pose any your questions. I don't think we've had any activity over there yet. Clay Center Area Chamber of Commerce Facebook page. We do have a question from the floor that was handed to us. What is the current sentiment on Medicaid expansion?
We have a below the line, which means it's passed out of committee and being proposed, but it's below the line, so we have not voted on it yet. We have a House concurrent resolution that would not allow Medicaid expansion in the state of Kansas. I want to hear more about it, but right now I'm saying why not have Medicaid expansion? It is several $million to the state for the first 3 years. Would be 100%. Then after the 3rd year, I believe I'm right on this, we would be responsible for 10% of it. So the feds would continue to pay the 90%. I think that's part of the issue. Tom alluded to it, and that's how much federal government do we want controlling whatever it is they think they're going to control. But you know, when we have people on waiting lists and we have people who need that funding, I believe that Medicaid expansion would be a good thing for our state.
Okay. We have another question from the floor, and please.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I think there's 2 critical parts to that Medicaid expansion question. The first one is we've gotten ourselves into a pinch with the way the Affordable Care Act, or people like to call it Obamacare. I thought Congress passed that, but anyway, how you look at it depends probably on your basic disdain for federal government and the presidency and all of those issues. But that aside, we wound up getting people who are too poor to qualify for Medicaid. So you get, or too rich, I guess. So there's a crack in there without Medicaid expansion where we have people who can't access health care except through the emergency room, which is the most expensive and probably the the least effective way to deal with your health care. So we have that problem. So there's that issue. Do we want to have a state and live in a state where people have the right for the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? Believe me, Vern and I know that you don't have much happiness when you have an orthopedic pain going on. So we want people, I think, to be as healthy as we can afford. This is affordable, at least at this time, and I think it's not wise for us to leave that money in Washington and let it go to other states. The second thing is, all of our hospitals, including this one, that agreed to the Affordable Care Act, part of the agreement between them and the insurance companies and that whole mess, which I'm not a big fan of Affordable Care Act, I'm actually a fan of Medicare for all. If I can qualify for Medicare, I think it would be a cheaper, better solution. We rank 37th in the world in terms of health outcomes. So we have a crummy system. We had a crummy system before Affordable Care where only the rich people generally got it. Most people, including farm people, went bankrupt because of health issues and bankruptcy relative to their health care. So I think we ought to do it. And if we don't do it, it's going to put rural hospitals in a big crack. We had a meeting in Salina before the session. I asked how many rural hospitals, and they couldn't say, but it's probably in Kansas maybe more than 50 might likely go out of business if we don't have expansion of Medicaid, because that was the deal, and the feds cut their funding for local rural hospitals based on the assumption there'd be Medicaid expansion. So I think it's a significant issue from two standpoints.
Right. Very good. All right, we do have another question. And please feel free, those of you that are seated here, to go ahead and write down your questions, especially if you have a follow-up question. Feel free to do that. My goodness, there's a nice number of people here, and I appreciate that. This is fantastic. And lots and lots of folks listening, as they often do. Feel free to call in, 785-630-0750. Call in your question. No, you don't have to go on the air. And you can text it in as well, or go to Facebook, Clay Center Area Chamber of Commerce Facebook page. And the question is there anything that can be done about the skyrocketing cost of propane? Is there really a shortage due to sending it overseas? Are each of you aware of the massive exports we've had during the past year? Okay. Not everyone is benefiting in the recent one-time assistance program, the LIEAP. It will only purchase 100 gallons anyway at those prices. Who would like to go first?
Okay. I'll be brief. We had a hearing in Utilities Committee on the propane crisis, and it, like all issues, it gets really complicated. If people prepay and have their contract, they got their propane, I think, around $1.60. And it did jump over $4 to $5. So that was an excessive thing, and I suspect the exports have a part to play in it, but the other part is it's a byproduct of the refinery process. And we are down where one of the major exporters of propane, or the holding, we have these, and I'm trying to think where that is, in Conway in Kansas is one of the major distribution points. And so part of the problem with it was we had a lot of other states that could come to Kansas and sent their trucks out. So we got a bottleneck there, and then we had, again, those pesky federal rules about how many hours you could be on the road, and the drivers are sitting there in their trucks 5, 6, 7, 8 hours waiting to get a fill up, and then they exceeded their time. So credit to the governor and to my chair, Senator Apple, in trying to change, and they got those rules changed. One of the industry leaders came and talked, and he said it's a simple matter of supply and demand, and the weather's bad, and he said if what you really need to do is pray that we have some better weather, and next Thursday and Friday it's going to be 41 degrees. That probably will do more to help the price of propane and reduce it. And I think people are having to make some adjustments, and I hate to see that. Again, rural Kansas gets hit harder with that, but they have to make their decision on how much propane to buy when it isn't cold, and they have to use that, the distributor and the dealers have to use that total amount for the whole year. So I would encourage people, if you can possibly afford it, to get under contract. Not everybody does that,
Right.
and the people under contract seem to be doing better with the program.
Yeah, that was my understanding, and it seems like more and more are offering contracts. I know there's some ads that have gone on the air at the radio station talking about getting your propane by contract and taking care of that ahead of time. We have done stories at KCLY regarding the massive exports, which is a relatively recent development where they've just increased massively. And I also understand, because I've discussed with a couple of propane industry officials, that logistics have been a major problem. Just sometimes it's road, sometimes it's rail, et cetera. And like you said about those sitting in the trucks. In fact, this gentleman who spoke with me from Illinois said that kudos to Kansas. He was very pleased with how Kansas has handled. He says your governor has done an extremely good job on that issue. So, okay. All right. What do you think will happen this session with income taxes? Will local governments have to increase property taxes due to cuts in state aid?
Short answer is probably yes. I think the income tax cuts that the income tax rate reductions have certainly put a pressure on our county or on our folks, because people still want services from our communities and our counties. So to provide those services, that income, that revenue has to come from somewhere. And my fear is that your property taxes, my property taxes, are going to go up. I think bringing up a subject that is in the news right now, and that's the mortgage registration tax. Seems like a little bitty thing until you look at the total amount of money that each of our counties, and I see Caleb shaking her head. I talked to one of our county commissioners this morning. I think it's somewhere in the near $100,000 for Clay County alone. I don't remember the figure for Riley County, but it's much larger than that. So when our county commissioners have to take $100,000 out and make up that $100,000, where do they go? It's at least $1 million, if not more, for making up that $100,000 that if this mortgage registration tax goes away. And there's two sides to it. I understand the bankers and I understand the counties wanting to keep it. So I'm hopeful. I know that the realtors have offered a compromise, and I think it may be either 5 or 7 year reduction. So giving people time to take a look at it, to see what we can do with it, how it might be mitigated. I don't know, but that's at least a compromise in the works, and I think that's what we should all be about, is compromise.
Tom, anything further?
Yes, I have you should never ever ask a former teacher to come to a forum. My little handout that you have here on the budget, if you turn to page 3, which is actually the second page, once you become a legislator, you forget how to count. But if you look at the top, it shows what the top rate and the bottom rate is going to be, and you can see already in law that that's going to go down. Then if you look at the second chart there, and you look at in red what the 6-year total is, which is, I want to explain clearly why we have this problem. We're going to have $3.7 billion less as a result of these 2012 and 2013 tax bills. Alf Landon, back in the 30s, instituted income tax, and as it evolved over time, usually under Republican governors, it was the belief that if we had a 3-tiered or a 3-legged stool tax system, that we would have a healthier, more robust state budget and economy, and we could weather the kinds of economic storms that all of us have kind of seen, especially since 2008. If you look at the very last page, you'll see that big chart, and if you look at the top, that's your general property tax. So the question is, will property taxes raise? And I would say yes, and the mortgage registration fee is just one little piece of that. If that winds up passing in the current form it is, or even if it's spread out 5 to 7 years, it's still going to increase our local property taxes. And if you want to know what our real problem is, it's not an income tax problem. It's not that our income taxes were too high. We have a property tax problem in Kansas, and if you look from the 1930s all the way up to this year, or right before this year, back in 1970, 53% of all revenue, both state and local, was 53% was property tax. In the 1990s, we had the new funding formula for schools, and that dropped that down to 32% as property tax, and we had built into that formula then the 20 mills instead of the enormous mill levy that we used to have to support our local schools. Now if you look, we have 31% property tax now, 28% sales tax, and 24% income tax. That income tax is going to go down. Most of us still want roads. We still care about our schools. And if you look at the chart on the other page, it shows the governor's recommended budget. We have a gap. We're spending more money than we're taking in. And in addition to that, we passed a bill that said if we do happen to get this huge bonanza from these tax cuts, which I don't believe makes economic sense, it's bad economics, but let's say, for the sake of argument, it does. We have a provision that if we get more than 2% growth in revenue, we have to use that for tax relief. So we reduce income taxes even further. So we are in, no matter how you cut it, all of these other issues are really inconsequential relative to what we're going to be doing to people at the local level if you want to keep your community healthy and robust. Some places in Kansas, unlike Manhattan and Clay Center, are not able to do that. A mill maybe only raises $10,000 or $15,000. In Manhattan, it raises almost $500,000. In Johnson County, I think it raises close to $2 million for a mill. So a huge difference in terms of local districts or local counties' ability to fill that gap. So that's just my school teacher facts. I was a math teacher and I love these charts. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
And did everyone present get one of these?
I have extras if you want your own beautiful color copy. I almost had to sell my soul to legislative research because legislators don't get a color copier, and they did this as a favor for me. Don't tell anybody in the House.
Yeah, right.
They
We'll
probably
keep it our
never
little
do it
secret
anyway.
here. Yeah.
We have our secrets as well.
Oh, goodness. For people, this is a question from the floor, for people on a fixed income, why is there such a high spend down to get on Medicaid?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question.
Let me say it again.
I think I understand
Okay.
it. I have a thought about that, and I didn't understand it until my dad got sick in his mid-80s. And you begin looking around and saying, wow, if you don't get better, what does this mean and how are we going to take care of you? I recently got married and my wife's parents were in that situation where they had to go on Medicaid in order to go into the nursing home or assisted living. And I have mixed feelings about that. My dad still has a little bit of money left. He's trying to spend it quickly. He's 92. And, you know, and my grandfather had great planning. When he died, he had exactly $3,000 left, and that's what the funeral cost. So, but most of us can't quite do that. And Medicaid is taxpayer money. And so if we're going to use taxpayer money to fund people who are in nursing homes or assisted living, it's not fair that the taxpayer fund that and that they also have assets that they can pass on to their children. And I know we all want to have that. I'd sure like to have a little bit of that money my dad had left. I have some things in mind I'd like to do with that to travel. But honestly, it's his money and it should go for his care, and when it's gone, then we'll have to go through that procedure to put him on Medicaid. And since that is the taxpayer picking up that tab, and Medicaid is one of our largest expenses in our state budget that's going to increase no matter what we do. Even if we don't expand Medicaid, it's still going to increase because Vern and I are baby boomers, and there's a lot of us out there, and I see some of you out here too. And we certainly hope you don't put us on an ice float to Alaska or out in a snowdrift. We'd really like to live till God calls us home. And so I think that's the basic philosophy, and nobody likes it. Everybody'd like to leave a little bit for their kids, but if the taxpayer is going to pick up the bill, then I think you ought to spend down your resources so that it's a fair thing for the taxpayer.
You're listening to a live legislative coffee. We're broadcasting today from Clay County Medical Center in Clay Center, Kansas. We're in the education room above the Wellness Center. If you're in town, feel free to drop by. Otherwise, we're glad you've joined us here on the broadcast, again being sponsored by AT&T. And you can give us a call if you like. You do not have to go on the air, 630-0750 is the cell phone number that you can call, or you can text a question to that number. We also have a Facebook page where you can pose a question if you like, and that is the Clay Center Area Chamber of Commerce Facebook page. A question from the floor that's been handed to me. Could you address, ask about the state's involvement in the issue of health care, specifically in relation to Obamacare, and how people are expected to pay for that health insurance. In this person's case, for their husband and themselves, it would cost $380, I believe, a month is what it says, on a very minimal salary. How is that affordable? How is that right that the government can mandate that I have insurance when I still couldn't afford the basic bronze package in Obamacare?
Well, one has to understand the Affordable Care Act, and I'm not sure that there are a number of people, I think there are a number of people who don't understand how all that's supposed to work. And I think it's still being worked out, and I'm not supportive of it necessarily. And, you know, I think each case is going to be on its own. I can't explain that sort of thing because I don't know the individual and what their income. Obviously, they're not meeting some of the tiered portion of it.
Isn't there some sort of a subsidy in some cases, or?
I wish I knew. I don't.
I thought that in some cases.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
There is.
Okay, so in some cases there is a subsidy. So I don't know if this was $380 a month per person. I think they said for my husband and I, it will cost us $380 a month. And of course, they have a very minimal salary. So
what we don't know is there a subsidy, is that the cost, and then do they qualify for a subsidy that might reduce that down? And I'm glad that both Vern and I are state and not congressmen, and I think Jerry Moran and Pat Roberts ought to get a chance to address that question, and I'm sure Tim Kuhlskamp would come rushing with an answer, and he and Rachel Maddow could work that out on the air for this person. But
maybe we'll save that.
I do want to share one thing. I did get a very distraught email from a person who spent 10, 20, 30 hours on the website, and we could get into that. I'm not about to defend bad technology or even good technology that doesn't work. I'm having trouble with my iPhone right now. But this person was really frustrated because they wanted to do a family plan, and there are lots of quirks in this law, and it turned out that their children somehow qualified for Medicaid. They did not, and they wanted to do the whole package deal, and you just can't bundle that. I funneled that person to Sandy Prager's office. We have a great insurance commissioner. I'm going to beat up on the governor. We had a chance to take over $30 million to work out our own exchange system. We could have had our own computer system, web-based system in the state. The guy who was going to do that, they had hired, they started it anticipating we would be smart and do that. The governor nixed it, saying, oh, I'm sure the election will give us a new president and Mitt will kill this idea. Well, it didn't happen. That guy went to Colorado. Their system's working pretty well. We don't have our own, so people have to deal with the feds. It's hard to get help for people. Bless Sandy and her staff. They helped this lady. They spent a lot of hours over the last 2 weeks figuring out what this individual family situation was. It turns out not the news they wanted to hear. They have to do a separate thing for the children and then do their own, which they would then qualify for a subsidy. So each of those are pretty much it. And they do have people called navigators. That sounds like a campus religious group I had when I was at K-State, but at any rate, supposedly those people are very helpful, and I'd suggest that person try, if they haven't, get a hold of the navigator and get some help about what their subsidy might be in that case. And if you've ever tried to go out and buy health insurance on your own, that $380, while it's more than you might want to pay, is probably a reasonable cost. You have one bad thing happen to you, like a rotator cuff surgery, you can easily spend that money and tons more.
Okay. What will the legislature do if the school lawsuit comes down in favor of the schools? Ignore, comply, raise taxes? Do legislators in general think public schools are doing a poor job?
This legislature thinks our public schools are doing a great job. I can't speak for my colleagues. Many of them would probably fit that last description you just gave. What will the legislature do when the Supreme Court hands down the Gannon decision? There are lots of options, I suppose. One might be thumbing their nose at the Supreme Court and saying, no, you're not going to tell us what to do. The other would be, and in my opinion, I think the Supreme Court could hold the legislature in contempt, depending on what the ruling is as to what we do. The governor has said, you know, he wants to support public education. He wants higher education to get the money back that was cut out of the budget last year. It's an election year, and I think some people say things just to make sure that they can be quoted correctly. So, this is not Vegas. It doesn't say here, does it? So, but that's okay. I think the governor and I have had discussions about this as well. As far as what else they can do, I think it's either a matter of ignoring the Supreme Court ruling, because if it does come down in favor of the schools, we will have to decide how much money, because the legislature is the appropriations portion of our government. I don't think the court should tell us that it has to be, 500 million or 600 million or whatever it's going to be. They can make a suggestion, and we can try and match that somehow. It's going to be tough, and in this climate of wanting to reduce income tax because we want to attract all these wonderful businesses to our state, I hope that, I'm like Tom, I hope that works. I've said many times, I want to share the governor's optimism on this grand experiment. I haven't seen any evidence of it yet. Other than in Johnson County, they have some people coming across the state line. Businesses, I'm not sure about people. So, what's the income tax break? Because some of those people are living in Missouri and they're still paying Missouri income tax, not necessarily Kansas. So I don't know that, I don't know where we'll go with it. It's just going to be interesting to see what the leadership of both the Senate and the House decide to do when the Supreme Court finally hands down that decision. I would have guessed we'd have had it by now, but I'm thinking that maybe the Supreme Court is going to wait, just guessing, they're going to wait and make us come back into a special session to handle, because a special session can be called for a reason. It can't be a variety of reasons. It has to be a reason. So if they hand down their ruling May 15th, we'll still be in session more than likely, because I think we go through, well, we may be out by May 15th. I don't remember the calendar. But if they hand it down that late, it will be a special session in the summer, I think. And what do we do then? Well, we'll have one thing to work on, and that'll be the court case, as well as how we fund schools.
And Senator, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think
he has his charts.
Yeah, I think if you would look on page 4, but I think what Vern said is right on the mark. I think the thing that concerns me the most are some of our Republican colleagues who say this will be a constitutional crisis, and in somewhat unflattering language that they will thumb their nose, actually they used another gesture, at the courts. Well, first of all, the great government teacher I had, senior in high school in Colby, was very clear about the separation of powers and the importance of respect for all branches of the government. So I don't think that's, whether you agree with the courts do a lot of things I don't agree with, but I think it's in my best interest, just like when I get a speeding ticket, to make sure that I pay my fine and am respectful to the person doing his job. Same with the courts. If you look on page 4 and you see what we spend, almost 50% of our state general fund money goes for education. You can't, we just talked about Medicaid, you can't take it out of Medicaid. We already cut post-secondary education. The governor then, if you look at, he's decided to give most of that, not all of it, but most of it back. He didn't fund corrections. So I don't like the notion that our corrections program would merge with Parks and Wildlife if some of our colleagues have their way, and our motto for the state would be catch and release. So we would, so that's not a smart way to solve this problem. The House Republican Campaign Committee, I don't know if you're going to get to be part of that or not, Vern.
Haven't been yet.
put out a 2-page colorful thing that I think was paid for. I should say, I don't know who paid for it. I suspect it was a group like Americans for Prosperity, but nonetheless, their view was school districts have contingency funds. They have to hold over their special ed funds. For some reason, the state has a cash flow problem because tax money doesn't come in. So school districts have to carry over enough money to pay salaries to teachers because they don't usually get their checks till after we've had 1 or 2 pay periods in school district. So there's a reason why school districts actually have a cash balance. Most of us have savings account. We teach our kids that's a good idea. Don't spend everything you have. Well, one of their plans is to take all of that money from all those little things that have to be set aside, or even some of their bond money that's there to pay bonds. So that's one idea. The other is they said if the court rules against us, they're going to cut higher, they'll have to take it out of higher ed, no choice. None of those are good. So the best solution is back on page 1, and that's to stop this crazy income tax cut. And page 3, we can't afford not to have that income, and we can't afford to shift it onto the property taxpayers. If people make money, they have money to pay taxes. Just because you own property doesn't mean you made anything off of it, and we can't double people's property taxes in order to take care of the school finance lawsuit. And I don't think we should thumb our nose at the courts. However, I hope if the courts take corrective action and decide to arrest those people, I hope they do it based on either party affiliation or how they voted. And I have a sling. I don't want an ankle bracelet, and I don't want to be stuck in the Capitol through the summer and into the fall.
Catch and release.
That's it. Catch and release. Thank
All right,
you.
we have
we
about-
have nobody to enforce the law. No problem. I guess they can do what they want. Sorry.
That's
Don't
all right.
mean to be facetious.
We have,
It's serious business.
let me check the clock here. We have about 12 minutes left, and this is a question for both of you, and then we'll see if there's any other questions from the floor that can be passed forward. Go ahead and take care of that. Feel free to call if you would like to get a question in before we close. The number 785-630-0750, or you can text a number, text a question to the same number, 630-0750, or visit us on Facebook. Jay Langvard over there taking care of that. It takes a 10-year-old to do those things.
Could you help fix my phone?
The Facebook page, Clay Center Area Chamber of Commerce. The question from the floor is, mental health services have been cut over the years. There has been some movement from Topeka to recognize there has to be a change. What have you heard about those changes? For example, waivers to allow mid-level care, psychiatric beds in hospitals, etc.
Mental health funding has been a long time problem, challenge for the mental health people as well as the legislature. How do we get back to funding mental health? I think we have to realize the importance of mental health just like we do physical health. I think I'm on the Pawnee Mental Health Center board, and every month that I go to a meeting, it's obviously finances is a huge part of what we talk about, and how can we? It's too bad that we have to charge people to come in when they don't have, and we can't see them, or as I understand it, they're not seen if they don't have insurance of some kind, and that's too bad, because people with mental health issues are many times people who can't afford health insurance. So what do we do with them? Well, we didn't fund corrections, and we don't want to put those people in our county jails, but that's what's happening to them. I'm willing to bet that, I'll bet you there are some right here in Clay County, if not Raleigh County, that have some people with mental health problems that have been picked up just because they acted strangely. We need to help people with mental health problems. And how we do it, it's going to take revenue. And revenue is something many of my colleagues don't want to talk about, increasing revenue.
Before you go on, Tom, there was a comment that, we know how many things are so interconnected, and this comment is in connection with that. If mental health services were better, schools could spend less. And then I have another question after you're done commenting, Tom.
Oh, I have to share a humorous thing, and I am often a critic more of the governor's financial plan and some of my colleagues' attempts that I think in the end would restrict all of our freedom, although some of those ideas may sound good depending on your political or religious persuasion. But one of the things I want to give the administration credit for, that it's in the works, I don't know that it's done yet. They closed down the Rainbow Mental Health Facility in Kansas City, but they've worked a thing out with one of the state hospitals to sort of rearrange funding and redo that. And I think there are some creative things that can be done. Some of you may know more about that afterwards. Please fill me in. I heard about that at the start of the session, but the governor's administration and some of the professionals and some of the association for the mental health associations worked on that. And I think those are, we need to do some of those creative ideas, just like we did in corrections, where we're trying to make sure that we work with people. Instead of sending them directly back to jail, we have community corrections that work with them. I'm distraught that the only option seems to be for people who have these mental health breakdowns is to be put in jail. I had a friend, family friend, that had their son that was in that very situation in Manhattan, who Pawnee did all they could for him, the only thing the family could do, and he was in his mid-30s. And so it's horribly expensive, horribly ineffective, and not really humane to do that. And it needs to be a priority, but it goes back to page 3 and 4 if we don't have the revenue, and I don't think the locals, again, can absorb that cost.
If I may, going back to the Rainbow Mental Health Facility in Kansas City, Kansas, I think they had 40-some beds, and he's opening 10.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
how
huge.
I'm not sure how much help that really is.
Is that 10 additional?
No,
Oh.
that's because it was closed. They're
Okay.
opening 10
Okay.
beds,
That's
and
good.
I, you know, and I
They shifted
applaud the
it to
government
Osawatomie.
trying to do that. They're with Osawatomie's help.
Got it.
I'm not sure. And I'll go back to it's 2014, folks, and what are we doing in November? I'm sorry. I have skepticism on some efforts by our administration to do some things.
Now, my humorous thing on the little prairie chickens, going back to your first question, we get fiscal notes. What's it going to cost if we pass this bill? At the end of that, the fiscal note from the governor's office, budget office, was that it would increase bed space in our crowded prisons, and we might have to build a new prison, but if we didn't do that. And I'm thinking, okay, so who are we? Oh, it's all the feds we're going to arrest and put in prison. As a reason. I thought it was just kind of humorous. I'd rather see those feds go for mental health counseling so that they would be kinder and gentler on those federal rules and regulations.
We have 6 minutes left, and there is another question. It was in regards to gun rights. It was just simply to comment on the proposed gun control laws. We know that there was a Kansas House Committee who delayed a vote on gun rights legislation this week. And let's see, I was going to see what AP had to say about it. The bill would void existing local gun ordinances throughout Kansas, they say. It would ensure that the open carry of firearms is allowed statewide and bar cities and counties from regulating gun and ammunition sales. Supporters of the bill want to protect a person's right to self-defense. What can you tell us that you're hearing about that bill?
Senator, correct me if I'm wrong. We have open carry in this state.
We do.
It's the concealed carry that I think is the biggest concern, and that is where are concealed carries being allowed?
Right.
Do we really want them in our courtrooms? Do we really want them in our mental health facilities? Do we really want them in our classrooms? I hope not. That's, and Second Amendment rights are very important, but I don't believe I believe there's a time and a place for everything, and I believe that guns, however large anybody wants to carry, if they can put it under their top coat, I guess it's a concealed carry. I don't know. But I just don't believe there's a place for guns in some of our institutional settings.
I actually learned a little bit about this from the sheriff at Geary County in our forum last week. And I think the proposal, our local units of government still have the right to regulate open carry. And the argument is that if a person goes from, I always use my example, from Colby to Clay Center, and they cross all these jurisdictions, and I all have different rules about open carry, is that really fair? Well, I would say yes, because I used to like Wyatt Earp and Matt Masterson, no, did I say that right? Bat Masterson. But at any rate, it's important, I think, that we let local units of government decide that, because people can open carry, and in some rural communities it may be different. People know that. The sheriff knows that. They know who might be at danger. In a suburban or urban center, that could be really tragic. And I think ultimately all of us agree the whole reason we do these Second Amendment things is we really want protection for people. I think expanding that open carry and taking local control away from that actually gives us less protection and increases the chances of those unfortunate kinds of incidents. So the House keeps doing it. I think Jim Howell on your side keeps making amendments to that, and they sort of see little nuances. I hope it doesn't come out, because people get sort of nuts. And I just read a thing in the Topeka paper this morning. There's a minister coming in. He's an NRA member. He has his own gun. He's been hunting since he was a kid. But he says some people get so enthralled with the Second, it becomes almost idolatry. It becomes, and back in the 90s, the guy who was the head of NRA said, well, if you really want to understand people who are our members that care about guns, you need to treat them like it's a religion. Well, I think when we go too far, and I think this bill goes too far with the open carry, and I sort of kid people. He talked about the code. I said, well, okay, if you're going to change it, open carry, but it has to be above your shoulders. And that way I know whether a person is a hazard to me or not. And hopefully their arms will get tired and I'll be safe, because they can't pull the trigger. So.
All righty. Well, we are coming up against the clock at this point. It is 10:58. Gentlemen, we really appreciate your work on behalf of all of us in Topeka. We've been speaking with State Representative Vern Swanson. Thank you for coming. And State Senator Tom Hawk. And we also appreciate very much AT&T for bringing us this live broadcast, I should say, for bringing it to our listeners. And we appreciate, of course, those that have attended here today. And we have some local cable cast that are recording the program. Both Eagle and Twin Valley will be airing that at some point in the future. Thanks to all of you that have come, and thanks to all of you who have written down your questions. It certainly makes the hour go by and helps these gentlemen not feel like they're having to fill the time. You've done very well. We do appreciate you addressing the questions.
Great questions.
All right.